when I started to work on myself meditatively or mentally, my story changed. What had previously been uncertain, been fearful, started to turn around really quickly. All of a sudden, I knew I was going home, and I knew I would survive.
Herr Klasanovic, Sie haben ein überaus beeindruckendes Buch geschrieben mit dem Titel
Mr. Klasanovic, you've written an extremely impressive book entitled I Was in Hell and Found Paradise Inside Me, 8 years in Thailand's toughest prison. In it you describe how you radically decided to follow a spiritual path in order not to break down psychologically. I would like to discuss this with you, but first I would like you to tell me how this imprisonment actually came about. The fateful day for you was the 30th of April 2011.
Ganz genau. An diesem Tag hat sich mein Leben sozusagen geändert.
Exactly. My life changed on that day. Before that, it all started when I was 18. I left Germany, went to Gran Canaria, got a job in the tourist industry with a big English agency. It was all about marketing. And that's how I ended up in Thailand at some point. There I had a girlfriend, we had a daughter, and I was able to build up quite a nice life for myself.
When was it that you went to Thailand?
Das erste Mal schon im Jahr 2000. Genau. Und
The first time was in 2000, when I was promoted to street captain, as they called it, and had a small team. So I went over there every year in the winter with a small team and, in the summer, mostly to Ibiza or Mallorca, Tenerife or Gran Canaria.
Mallorca, Teneriffa, Gran Canaria. Und so war das, dass ich
So it was that in Thailand, at my peak, I managed 3 hotels, the marketing, had about 300 people under me, and was able to build up quite a good life. That is, a nice house, a sporty car, motorbikes. I was very young and placed a lot of value on what I owned, and I was free to show that off. I must also mention that I entered a certain party scene quite early on. I earned a lot of money. I was quite young, had a 5-figure monthly salary, and led a certain lifestyle that was a bit excessive. Alcohol, drugs, discos, and cocaine. That was something completely normal for us at the time. We didn't think much about it. And so it also happened that I had never sold drugs. I had no reason to be a drug dealer, but on the day in question, I passed on a telephone number to a friend of mine where he could get something for himself and another colleague for a party.
Und einem anderen Kollegen für eine Party etwas besorgen konnte.
What my colleague did not know, however, was that this friend with whom he wanted to organize this party was a police employee or an informant. He had just wanted to organize a party with drugs with him. I arrived there. A little later, the drug dealer also arrived, and the whole area was surrounded by police. They were just waiting for him to come. And that's how the arrest took place.
What happened after the arrest? Did you have good legal representation? Was there a court hearing, as we would imagine?
Nachdem mein erster Anwalt mir ein Angebot gemacht hat, dass
After my first lawyer made me an offer that he could talk to the public prosecutor by paying 2,500 euros and that I would get 5 years in prison, I refused at first, saying, that can't be. You can't get 5 years for what I did. I'm not the seller and I'm not the buyer. I also admitted what I had done to the police, that I had passed on the telephone number. The police also encouraged me and said, you have a really good chance of getting out of this. You just have to stick to the truth. So I got a new lawyer, who was a Swiss gentleman, has a chain of lawyers in Thailand, and then he also continued to talk me into this deal. He said, "We just have to go to court here now, but you will win your case quite clearly." He also tried for bail, which was set at 50,000 euros.
What does winning mean in this context?
That you will win your case in court. You will be acquitted. In Thailand, it would not be a crime to pass on a phone number as long as you do not have drugs on you or make any profit from it.
So they just didn't believe you, that you'd only passed on a telephone number?
My problem was that this certain lawyer had something else in mind. Unfortunately, he got the 50,000, now rising to 52,000 euros, from my mother, although I warned my mother at the time to please put the money back into my account. But he was able to convince her that he needed this money to be able to react when it mattered, to get me out of it. She signed the money over to him on the last day. I only found out about it later. And so the day came when the lawyer came to me in prison shortly before I was to testify in court and said that I should please change my testimony now. I was supposed to testify that I didn't know the other people who were arrested. Instead, because there was also a petrol station at the place where the party was organized, I was just filling up, and then I saw a lot of commotion and people were running around with guns, and I would have got scared and just run along with them, and that's how I was arrested. Of course, I immediately told the lawyer, "That's not possible. I've already made my statement to the police. And above all, I signed it. I've already told them everything that happened." But he said no, he had already discussed it with the police. The police also advised him to do so, otherwise I wouldn't get out of here. And after a few days of thinking about it, I took the path that the lawyer had advised me to take. I then sat in front of the judge and told the story. Later, the police came and gave their statement. They kept pointing at my friend who was sitting next to me, who was also in prison with me, kept mentioning his name, and kept describing this whole evening, how he had organized these drugs. They never mentioned me until the end. I kept asking the translators, "What's going on? Why aren't they talking about me?" And they said, "No, nothing so far." Until the last policeman stood up, and then talked about me and said, "We can't assess this man sitting there, this Mr. Klazanovich, at all, where exactly he is connected to these people, what he has to do with it. But we can only confirm one thing here and say that he, Your Honor, lied to you last time. He knows these people. He knows this gentleman sitting next to him. This is one of his colleagues, his friends. That means we don't know why he lied to you here in court. But we can tell you one thing, they know each other. And this is an organized group, probably an organized gang." The police were very, yes, you can say, disappointed in me for making such a statement. I kept looking at my lawyer, of course, who didn't pay any attention to me at all. I realized, or knew at that moment, that he had set me up. He talked me into a story here that was not true at all. The police knew nothing about such a deal or collusion.
That is to say, the change in your testimony just made you look completely untrustworthy?
Absolutely. The police were angry. They then labeled me as a gang member and said, "He must belong to them. He lied here. He knows the people. And so they are all in cahoots." Now came the day of sentencing. The judge stood up. We were then all sentenced to 13 years. The judge believed the police, and my lawyer didn't even show up for a fortnight. I didn't know what was going on. After 2 weeks, he came back with the reason that something had gone wrong and that someone had probably planted covert evidence on the judge. He must have given the judge hidden evidence, and so I was convicted as well, something he had no influence over. But I knew that he had set me up. I saw that in court. So I told him, listen, I never want to see you again in my life. You really make me sick. I had the feeling that if the window hadn't been between us, I could have done something to this man.
How did you react to the verdict? Did you know what to expect?
No, I knew that the sentence wouldn't be a small one, of course, but I never thought we'd get 13 years, and especially not for what I did. I still believed that somehow the judge would see that I wasn't the dealer. You don't have feelings at such a moment. It wasn't that I started crying or got emotional. For me personally, it was like I was completely empty. There was nothing, no thought, no emotion. I just sat there and was completely empty. There was an absolute emptiness inside me. It even took a very long time for this emptiness to fill with anything or any sign of thought, emotion. You could say it went on for hours, where I just sat there, even in the cell, and just breathed. Nothing came into my head.
And then slowly you became aware that your whole life had changed with this judgment.
Exactly. And my friend was very emotional, unlike me. He also started shouting in court and later the whole time in the cell and said, "No, we can't accept this. We have to move on. We were set up. It's not like we're dealers." I then got a new lawyer who advised me against it. He said it would be in Thailand. It would be very difficult. I would be a foreigner, and the king of Thailand would be very sick by then. It could be that there would be a big amnesty and I would be acquitted. He said it would take years before I would even get to appeal. And then there was the chance of being transferred to Germany after 4 years. At that point, I had already been in prison for 1 year and 3 or 4 months, and I should preferably look for the quickest way home. Because if I go to appeal, the transfer to Germany won't work either. You couldn't prepare anything. And so I thought I was doing the right thing now. I will simply accept it and not go for appeal. My friend, who was the first accused, in Thailand there is this gradation, first, second, third accused, he was the first, went to appeal. After 1 year, he was indeed summoned to court. I was also invited. The judge starts reading and says that the appeal court believes that this was a staged operation, that we are indeed not the dealers, and that the certain gentleman who was sitting next to me, my friend, will be acquitted today. And I sat there, looked at the translator, looked at the judge, raised my hand and said, "Excuse me, and what about me? I am the third defendant. You can read. I have the least to do with it." He then looked at his records again, actually apologized to me, and said he was sorry, but I hadn't appealed. For that reason, I can't leave today. Only the first accused can. So that was how I continued to stay in prison.
How did you initially experience this time in prison? What is it like in a Thai prison?
For someone who has had no prison experience at all, like me at the time, it is an unimaginable place. You're in a state for 2 to 4 weeks where you keep shaking your head at least 5 times a day and saying, "This can't be true that such a place exists." That was the reason why I immediately started a diary, because I thought, I have to write all this down. All these impressions, what happens here, unimaginable. I have also never watched a film, a Hollywood film, that could have described this in any way, even in a similar way. My first cell was 120 square meters. On the day I arrived, there were 180 of us in that cell. On the day I was transferred to Bangkok, we were 300 people.
So there were always big rooms with very, very many people in them.
In Phuket, yes. Later, in Bangkok, I had a cell with 60 square meters, and there were 75 people at peak times. And in the VIP cell, which I came to after 4 years, we were 55 to 60 people in 60 square meters, minus the toilet and a large water tank, which was still in the room. Yes, it's all very different from what you can imagine a prison to be. For example, when you go to eat, 2,000 people walk through a small gate, squeeze through. There's no order, there's no standing in line, but you squeeze through this gate, the stronger ones first, or the gangs and the mafias first. If you're a newcomer, you're always at the end of the line. Then the food is shared. Then you stand in a line. But even there, before you get the food, those who hold sway in prison have already had the best of it. They have connections in the kitchen, which means that the best thing would be to see something of the chicken apart from the feet, the head, and the feathers. And with the pork, it's also the case that if there's a day when there's also pork, then in the end you probably only get the skin and the bristles. And it's the same with vegetables. It took me a very long time to climb up the hierarchy and get something more than just broth and rice, but also some vegetables and meat. That takes time.
To what extent did it play a role in the hierarchy that you are European?
A very big role. As a European, you're always on the second or third rung. In Thailand, their own people are the most important ones first. Then you have the other Asians. You could say that all the others, like Japanese, Koreans, and whatever else there is in Asia, are usually classified as second. Then you have us, the white foreigners. And then you have the dark-skinned, the Africans. You can see everywhere that this system exists. As for the sleeping place, I slept for months only on my side. You can imagine that if you have less than 1 square meter, you either lie on your left or on your right side. You put whatever you have under your head. There are no beds or mattresses there. We lie on the floor. I slept on a Coca-Cola bottle for a very long time, on a plastic one. That means for 2 or 3 months. One has the other's feet in a scissor system. That is, I put mine in his, so to speak, have his legs here, he has mine there, and so we are packed, so to speak. They also called this row of newcomers the sardine can row, because that's how you feel. You also don't turn around or go to the toilet at night, because otherwise your place would be closed immediately. Then you'd have to wake up the whole row of people to squeeze back in. It happened to me once that I went to the toilet, and then it was impossible to get back in. I then spent the night standing or sitting on the toilet. And that's how it is with everything. You don't wash yourself there as you might think. There's a shower, but you have a basin where water is filled. You have a plastic jug, and then you fetch the water from it and wash yourself with it. But even there, it's always the mafias and the Thais who come first. Especially if you're new. You're in the third row. The third row would mean that you only have what's left, which is usually a foamy brown broth that you wash yourself with. I remember the first day I managed to get to the front to have some of this fresh water. That was an experience. People also tried to push me away, but I stood firm and said, "No, today I'm going to wash with this clean water." It's exactly the same with medical care. There was a guard who put on a white coat and played doctor. He tried to find out about any illnesses. You could tell right away that he enjoyed it very much, because he had no idea at all about it. And they also made jokes about people who had really serious illnesses. The most you got was paracetamol. They also used it to treat someone with cancer. They had antibiotics, but they would always say, "That's only for emergencies," or "You're not dead yet." They would joke. You only get it just before you die. That's what happened to me once. I'd caught a flu-like infection. I don't know exactly what it was. About 10 days, I still couldn't eat. I almost couldn't drink anything. I was getting skinnier and skinnier, so that even the Thais said, "White man, if you don't do something now, if you don't start doing something now, you won't make it." And the guards just told me every time, "No, you're still fine. Here, 2 paracetamol, press into my hand every day." And that was it. And then a gentleman showed me a trick. He said, we could give you something that's used for scabies. It's a highly corrosive liquid called Sema lotion. You put this liquid, this lotion, on the skin, and within seconds, it immediately burns the first, second layer, maybe even the third layer off the skin. And that's how you kill the scabies there. It's very, very common in prison. He advised me to smear this liquid on my testicles. We men have very soft, sensitive skin there. And that would cause a reaction that would surely make the guards give me antibiotics. I didn't care. I just wanted to get better. I said, "Come on, give it to me." And that's how it was. I rubbed this lotion on my bottom and immediately regretted it seconds later. It turned bright red. It was redder than any red I'd seen before. And I started to panic myself. What have I done to myself? But I took it to the guards and stood there again. The guard looks at me and says, "White man, what are you doing here again?" "I'm not well. I have a problem down there too." "Yeah, well, take your pants down." And so I went, pulled my pants down. I didn't even get to my knees. "My God, pull your pants back up." He didn't even want to see that. He was so disgusted by it that he immediately went back and brought me 10 antibiotics, amoxicillin. I can remember. I took the amoxicillin, slowly walked back to the cell. Then my colleagues looked at me, even from a distance. And then I held the pills up in the air like a trophy. Then everyone shouted, "Yeah!" They were very happy that I'd got them. In fact, I was able to cure myself with them. And a few days later, I felt much better down there too. You have to say, after a few days, I did start peeling it all away. It looked like a very small child's soft baby skin, but that has also healed. What I mean to say is that the circumstances are very, very difficult. These laws, being able to feed oneself, to sleep, to wash oneself, to get medical care, are very different from ours.
What was everyday life like in prison?
Well, I was in a kind of state of shock in those early days, although my friend had it worse. For example, he couldn't go to the toilet for 30 days. It was only on day 30 that he could really go to the toilet for the first time. For me, it lasted 18 days. I only urinated. Otherwise, I couldn't manage a bowel movement. But then, quite quickly, I realized I had to do something. And so, I started to exercise. I did what I could with my own body. Press-ups, found somewhere to hang from to do pull-ups. I did squats. I became very detached. And that's also where I discovered my love for books.
But there was no compulsory program apart from sleeping and eating?
No, we just hung out there, so to speak. There was no compulsory program for us. You had to keep yourself busy. That was also very, very important. There were many who couldn't do that and who perhaps also got a bit lonely. Those were the most vulnerable. So the training helped me a lot. It was a kind of freedom for me. And then reading got me out of prison a bit and into another world. In my first prison in Phuket alone, where I was for 1 year and 7 months, I devoured 100+ books, if not more. I read all the books of everyone who had books, sometimes twice. That was my first step towards a certain freedom.
Did this then also have an effect on the hierarchy?
Yes, it did. I was actually given the job quite quickly in Phuket. I was supposed to be the leader of the whites. Because we whites were very unpredictable. The Thais are a very quiet people. Then, of course, it went a bit further with the hierarchy. Then I was able to get along better with the Thais, and they accepted me more and more in this first prison.
You were then transferred to a prison in Bangkok. What was it like there?
After I was sentenced to 13 years, it was clear I couldn't stay in Phuket. Phuket prison was much too small. It was not a high-security prison. And so on this morning we were woken up at 6 o'clock, including my friend who was still in prison with me then, and 2 other foreigners, a Swiss and a gentleman from Ghana, and 4 other Thais. They tied us in chains, feet and hands, and led us to a car, a pickup truck with a small loading area in the back. There was a kind of cage on it. They opened the cage and it was clear that we wouldn't all fit in. But the guards didn't want to know anything about it. We were given 2 bottles of water and the journey began. No asphalt roads, but potholes. Every time we hit a hole, we went up, down, jumped up in this cage, and the journey went on for 16 hours. We were taken out twice to go to the toilet. We were also given something to eat, the first time at a petrol station. The guards opened the cage for the first time and saw we already had a lot of vomit. Well, not me now, but there were some Thais who vomited. Some Thais didn't manage to urinate in the bottle, which means the urine was all over the place and we stank like hell. So, the crossing. We arrived. We were encouraged because in Bangkok the prisons are supposed to be much better than on Phuket. And we were taken to a more modern prison, after all. The thing was, there are now 2 better prisons in Bangkok, but they are still much farther away from the standard than what we have here. There are still a lot of people in one cell, and the conditions are also difficult. But it should be so that we don't end up in such a prison. But we should be taken to a prison that is the most run down, and you can say the prison where they just take people but don't want to fetch them back out. It's called the Bombat Piset Klang, which is a prison only for drug dealers and for drug addicts. We were taken there. We found out quite quickly and were able to see that everything was several levels worse. That was when a building awaited me where there were no other white foreigners, only an elderly gentleman from England. He was already in his mid-60s, and he was transferred shortly afterwards. So I stayed alone in this Building 7, among 800 Thais and about 30 to 40 Africans. Yes, then I knew I had to do something again. I trained there from the first day. I arrived already, I must say, very muscular in those 1 year, 7 months from Phuket. I came to prison weighing 70 kilos, and in Bangkok, I must have been at 80 by then. The Thais liked that. The gangs tried to recruit me, but when they realized that I wasn't interested at all and that I was really doing my thing because of my experience in Phuket, they left me alone.
mein Ding durchziehe, hat man mich auch in Ruhe gelassen. Man hat richtig sehen können, wie die
You could really see the bosses of these gangs telling people, let this white man do it, leave him alone. I had a team of 10, 15 people pretty quickly. Everybody wanted to train with me. They were drawn from all these gangs. There were 3 big gangs in there, and I had guys from every gang. That was the only place, or the only grouping, where the gangs had anything to do with each other. But I didn't know the language, and all of a sudden, I had to do something there. In my cell, I started to use the characters that the Thais have, which don't necessarily resemble our letters. There are 44 of them, but only 36 are used. So I started to draw 2 of these 36 characters every day. And so I got through all 36 characters within a little more than 2 weeks. And I was then appointed as a translator in this prison for years. So began my work in this Building 7. I was then able to buy everything from them with money through a guard who could be bribed. He then arranged for books to be organized in these other wings of the building. He would arrive every month with a bag full, 15, sometimes 20 books. And so, later, I was able to exchange books with other prison wings. At some point, I had accumulated and stacked 100+ books and no longer knew where to put them. And so, I was given a room. I had to pay a bit of money to get this room, where I could stack my books on a shelf. Thus, the first library was born from Building 7. They didn't have one before. Then the Thais asked me if they could put their books there. And so we had a small English-Thai library. And with my library and my fitness, the guards liked me, and also the gangs. I was then offered a job working for the prison, that I would have a kind of security team together with a few Africans, meaning we would also search the prisoners before they went into the cell, look at what they had hidden in their pockets. Is there anything illegal there before going into the cell? The guards would sit there and watch us doing that. And so it was that I got even more connections, even if one of them had scabies. In the cells, for example, soap was forbidden. You weren't allowed to take anything with you except a book. And if someone had scabies and needed soap, instead of having to stick it in the back or hide it somewhere, he could talk to me and I would turn a blind eye to him, if he was someone who also behaved in prison. I was able, slowly, to start to transform this prison, so that they did favors for favors there. I never accepted money. I didn't need it. I had the support, at that time, or the help from the German embassy, which every German prisoner has. We got a loan that we had to pay back later.
Ein Darlehen, das wir später zurückzahlen müssen. I
also had a little bit from the family, and so I was able to do this gym in the prison. At some point, martial arts came along. It's a big thing in Thailand, like football is here. At some point, I joined in too, was allowed to participate, and was able to reach a high level quite quickly. So that, at some point, I was promoted to trainer. Because my coach was then released and he handed over the gloves to me, he trusted me to do the right thing and handle things well there. We had 2 or 3 pads and gloves, and I had them all sewn, made up nicely, and had a very famous fight, which is described very well in the book.
You did a lot physically, established yourself in prison. How did the spiritual path come about then?
That came at a time when I found myself in such a deep hole again. I was supposed to be transferred to Germany after 4 years, and they started collecting all the documents in my 4th year in prison. They photographed me countless times and took fingerprints. They were sent to Germany, first certified by a court, then back by the Thai court, and that went on for a year and a half. I was there for 5.5 years. Then, in August, the German embassy came and congratulated me again and said, "So, Mr. Klazanovich, we have already called 2 policemen from Freiburg. They will pick you up. It will all happen around the first week of October. You're going home." And of course, I was on cloud 9. Promised everyone all the things I had there. So, who should take over the fitness? Who should take over the library? I had already organized people I trusted. And then, a good friend of mine, who was also a kind of mother figure, came to visit me there every fortnight for years. A German who had been living in Thailand since the 1980s and did it on a voluntary basis. She arrived one day in mid-September and said, "Well, Maxim, I didn't want to come and visit you today." And I said, "What do you mean? What happened?" I noticed right away that something was wrong. She said, "Your transfer was rejected after all." I said, "What do you mean, rejected? It's all done. I'm going home in a fortnight." "I don't know how to tell you. We don't know either. It was rejected at the last minute." That went on for months. It took 3 or 4 months for the German embassy to find out that a law had changed, that we should now pay a fine after all. In my case, it was over 20,000 euros to be able to be transferred. During this waiting period of 3 to 4 months, I felt quite bad. I didn't know what it was all about. I thought maybe my lawyer had pulled some other trick out there, so I would never get out of here. So it was that I was lucky enough to meet a gentleman. This gentleman slept next to me, and he was from Nepal, from Kathmandu. He was caught in Bangkok, disguised as a monk with hashish. And when this gentleman went to prison, he was in a very, very bad way. He left his 2 children at home with his wife, said he would come back in the evening, made such a trip for the first time, and they caught him, and he was now in prison. But I watched the gentleman, how after a while he always sat there in the morning, maybe when you go to the toilet, around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. And I thought to myself, poor guy, he can't sleep. What is he doing? He must have a lot of things going through his head. I had no idea, no clue what he was doing. So the day came when I got another visit from the embassy. They didn't have good news. He looked at me and said, "Maxim, you should breathe properly. You're not breathing properly. Look, of course you're in a bad way." I just looked at him and said, "What do you want from me? What do you mean you're not breathing properly?" I was already annoyed. If I wasn't breathing, I'd be dead, wouldn't I? Of course I'm breathing. But no, try to breathe properly. Take power before air and hold that for a second or 2, and then only exhale and breathe out powerfully. Breathe it all out, and then stay and listen to that silence. And I did that. I did that 5 times. Breathed in deeply, held, and then breathed out, completely out. And then again. I have to say, that was the very first time in months that I'd felt such a spark of calm, almost a lightness. I asked him, "You tell me, that thing you do every morning, sitting there, can you show me that? Teach me." He said, "Sure, let's get up together tomorrow morning." Then he woke me up and we sat next to each other. Sitting cross-legged already worked very well because we always just spent time on the floor. And I sat there cross-legged, composed myself, looked at him and said, "Well, what should I say now? What do I have to say now?" He looked at me. No, you don't have to say anything. Just sit and breathe." "That can't be all, just sit and breathe." "Yes, it can, really. And then, when a thought comes, go back to breathing. Feel your breathing and just go with it. If that's all it is, that's no problem." So I sat there, eyes closed, trying to breathe, and as soon as I closed my eyes, I heard and felt the thoughts coming and going. There was a quickness, a roller coaster inside me. There was nothing about breathing. There was just, my God, I wanted to open my eyes again. It was too much for me. I stopped after 5 minutes. I thought, this is not for me. Maybe you have to have a talent for it. Or you have to be Asian. We Europeans are not suited for it. On the day in question, they took us out of the cell. We spend a few hours during the day on our football field outside in a yard like this, and it's always the same picture. You have the walls, barbed wire, blue sky. So, on this day, I look at the blue sky, I'll never forget it, and think, somehow, something feels different today. Well, I couldn't describe it, but it was different somehow, this particular morning. Such flash moments, such short moments. Could it have something to do with that, those 5 agonizing minutes? So, the next morning, once again, whatever, I'll sit down again. I kept on with it. At some point, the gentleman was released before me, but I kept sitting. 5 minutes became 10, 10 became 15. I can remember the first time I opened my eyes and saw that I had been sitting for half an hour. I couldn't believe it. I realized quite quickly during that time that rest was my medicine. My balm was rest. At the beginning, it wasn't minutes of rest, it was seconds of rest. Breathing for 5 seconds can seem like a very long time if you do nothing but breathe for 5 seconds. And I tried again and again to enjoy these 5 seconds and to make a break in this endless chain of thoughts, which already, you wake up in the morning or in the middle of the night, and then it starts and then you can't sleep anymore. Then came the first yoga booklet. It was a yoga journal in English. It came from another building. I read that too, of course. You read everything there. You read the smallest piece of paper you can find. You're happy to have anything to read. I flicked through it. Women doing some kind of stretching exercises. I read through it and thought, I'll just try this the next morning. There were a few positions in there. I have to say, this first breathing, this inhalation and then long exhalation, I went on to combine it with a lot of other things. Sometimes I hyperventilated, or I exhaled strongly 3 or 4 times and inhaled once. I tried a lot of things out. What do I achieve with this breathing in order to interrupt this chain of thoughts? It was very important to me that I could simply retrieve this balm. I could feel that, and at the same time, I knew that I was divided. There's still this head person who just talks a lot, and my faith wants to tell me something. I recognized myself, my parents or my teacher or a good friend, and somehow I was able to make sense of what was going around in my head. But I wanted to visit this other place again and again. I realized there was something there. It's not superstition, I'm not imagining it. It is there, and it feels good. It's a source of well-being. And so I experimented a lot with these breathing techniques to get there again and again. When I did the first yoga pose that morning, I can remember exactly. It was a seated forward bend. So I'm sitting there, my legs are stretched out with my upper body straight, and I want to touch my toe here. But of course, I only came up to my knees, and that pulled. And I said, oh, that's pulling. Because of all my training, my muscles were short and tight. I couldn't do much because of those muscles. But I got to a point where that pulling started to feel kind of comfortable, along with my breathing that I used then, this strong inhale and long exhale. That felt good somehow. So I held this position, realized, oh my God, this feels intoxicating all the way to my heart. It feels really good. Take more and more breaths. I don't know how long I spent in that first forward bend, but it was incredibly good. I realized that I could go longer than 5 seconds. I've already managed 10 seconds with a few breathing techniques. 10 seconds of calmness, 10 seconds of feeling consciousness was, wow, an incredible experience for me. With this second aid, breathing and stretching combined, I knew, my God, there's still a lot I can do. and so the interest in yoga was born. For me, in the beginning, it was a trick, a spoof. I thought it was healthy for the body, but what it did for your fascia, joints and all that. I only found out about that years later when I did the training here, having been freed. For me, it was just one thing initially, a trick to be able to dive into this world as the breathing techniques were. I developed a great interest, and I started to do something with an apple, to eat it in a way that also brings you back to this place. I had the opportunity to join a walking meditation with some monks who offered a course that was only for the Thais. But they let me join them. And for 40 days, I meditated with them and learned walking meditation, which I later changed a bit in my own way. I tried to practice with everything. With listening, at some point, I found a way to get there, to that place, but which at the same time allows such a high perception that you listen to the person with your whole being. You listen very deeply into them. It became more and more intense. Then, over 3 or 4 years, I spent a great deal of time on this state. So, I started to change this head person maxim and this consciousness maxim naturally. The more often I made my way there into this little paradise that I had discovered, the stronger and bigger it became. It grew. And the other thing, you could really observe how it... The first time in my dreams, and I woke up in the morning and realized, my God, what is happening here? From the person who just had nightmares and has had the same dream over and over again for years about my daughter, how I'm looking for her and can't find her. This dream kept me intensely busy for a year. They were real nightmares. All of a sudden, the story changes in my head. And that was, as I said, very recognizable with the dreams. But also, the things that disturbed me before, in prison, which were countless things, suddenly happened with a completely different understanding. And then I knew, what I do is more than just faith. It is a transformative story that happened incredibly quickly. I could really observe what was happening here.
Did this change also have an impact on your fellow prisoners?
Absolutely. So, in the morning at 4 o'clock, I had my routine. When the others were asleep, I lay there or started with yoga, then with breathing techniques. Then I spent time in meditation, and at the end I said my prayer. I always prayed. And that was my routine for years. And when I came out of it, I was in a state. I couldn't stop grinning. It was such an incredibly intensely contented state that was indeed coupled with happiness. I also had some very intense experiences, which are described well in my book. Later, I found out that there are spiritual names for this, like the Samadhi path, or where you actually also visually start to come out of such a state and see things in slow motion or in colors. Or one day there was a highly intense experience, which I will certainly not forget for the rest of my life, driving me repeatedly later on to want and seek it. I spent a very long time trying to find that state again, which I only had the chance to experience once in such an extreme way.
Can you describe this particular experience? How did it come about?
Well, this particular day started just like all the other days. I would sit and I had already made it this far. First of all, I had already been sitting for almost 45 minutes without noticing the time in any way. But my concentration was always at the nostrils. So I could feel the inhalation and the exhalation here, and that's where my calming phase began. First of all, achieving calmness, that was step 1. That is, gather the thoughts, then stop, push them to the side, rest, and begin to enter into calmness here. And then the path into consciousness began. Consciousness was something highly exhilarating for me. At the beginning, it was such a feeling of well-being. But at some point, it became feelings of happiness. You could feel what was happening, that it was flowing through your whole body, and an incredible smile inside you. You couldn't stop it. No matter whether breathing in or breathing out, it was the most beautiful thing you could feel. I was already very good at that, almost every morning. Then, as soon as it was time to leave the cell, I would open my eyes. The cell door would open, and I would walk out with the others. I would smile, I would feel good, and this would last for a bit. On this day in question, I open my eyes again, the smile is there, just like on other days. I get up, start walking, and it becomes more and more beautiful. Every step feels just like my nostrils. Oh, it's intoxicating. I walk and think, but it's beautiful today, very special. Then I go down the stairs and I notice. I have to say that I was always one of the first to be allowed out because of my job there. With the security team, there were about 10 of us who went out first, and the others followed in about half an hour. I walk down the stairs and notice how my breathing gets deeper and deeper, and the feeling of happiness is still there, which it never was before. But slowly it would fade away now. But on that day, and I realize, my God, how great is this today. I come out there and I look at this courtyard, and I notice that the grey and the blue and the barbed wire became so intense that I thought, something is wrong here. But it wasn't a feeling of fear. It was more like, oh my God, more of this. I remember I went to this sink. I had my plastic bowl and I took this water. The moment I hold the water up like that, I realize how I can watch every drop out of the corner of my eye. I don't know if you can see that in a certain film or in Matrix, where you saw everything in slow motion. That's more or less what it was like. I let the water splash on me and felt as if each drop brought its own feeling, but also in slow motion, where I could watch it like that. I thought, my God, what's going on here? I didn't want to stop. That was a feeling. I never wanted to have a normal state again. I then had my job where I was standing there with someone else when now everyone else comes out of the cells to see that nothing is handed over there. And then I had to say to my friend, who was always standing next to me and watching, I can't. I have to leave you here alone today. I just wanted to retreat somewhere and enjoy that. We're talking about a condition that had been going on for at least half an hour. It didn't stop. So I sat there. I retreated to a corner and sat there and just watched these people come out now. I can remember. My mouth was watering. I remember it very well. Even today when I think about it, it comes up a bit like that. And then these people and these impressions came. Then I was surrounded, the 850 people, and so slowly it disappeared. I had the feeling, no, it's going away. I then ran back again. It got back into it. That day would then lead to my meditating for hours sometimes on the following days. I tried it again and again. I was crazy about it. I thought, I have to go there again. I have to do this again. I would only stop doing it a certain time later. Then I said, no, stop it. When it comes, if it is to come, it will come. I then lived according to certain rules that may have led to it, I analysed later. I ate very little. My last meal was at 2:30 p.m. The next one would be at 7:30, 8. You had this long time without food. But I also fasted from 2:30 on Saturday to 2:30 on Sunday. I have to say that I helped to build a church in there with prisoners. I also preached the word of God there for 3 years. I always prepared myself for it. And I came to fasting through Christianity, in the New Testament a lot, and also in the Old. So I tried it out and realized that it was very good for me. Although I was already very undernourished and exercising, I felt it was good for me. All these laws that I followed. For example, I also followed a law for years that lying was not allowed at all. That is, not lying in the way that you say something wrong or a lie, because that would already be the extreme. That would not have been possible at all. But also not embellishing things, that is, making them beautiful in order to gain an advantage. That's what I practiced for years, to say that's not possible either, but always, at all times, to speak precisely the truth and nothing but the pure truth. That was very difficult at the beginning, but I got into it. I also practiced something that meant doing something good every day. That is, it could be to wish someone well while doing the laundry or washing the dishes, but also just to wish someone well and wish him all the best without him knowing it. To have a short prayer in your heart and say, "Dear God, bless him too," or help him right now with his injury, or something the others have against him now. Let him light up there. That was suddenly standard for me. I didn't just do that once a day, but this whole thing must probably have led, analyzed today, to my coming to this extreme state. I realized quite quickly that this place that lived in me was my home, my paradise, my real place, my real state. That the headman was simply there to function, to do certain duties, to still have a connection socially here. But it was nothing real compared to what changed me from an authentic form. It was nothing compared to this precise consciousness that is never wrong, that is always right. You say what you want to say. You don't forget to say something either. You know that what you've said has arrived exactly there, exactly at that point where I wanted to say it. My taste has changed. But then, as I said, that is something that is described very well in the book. These ways, experimenting with food. So it was that this place, this home, dominated my life more than the head person. And through that, I started to write as well. I wrote down my first retreats or seminars already in the cell.
You mentioned your diary at the beginning of our conversation. Have you continued to write entries in it?
My first diary was made of scraps of paper in Phuket, and yes, I was in this wow state. My God, what's going on here? Can this be? And I had material. I could have written several books. At some point, I arrived at my hiding place where this material was stored, and it was gone. My diary was gone. I searched and asked, and at some point, the Thais told me, "Watch out, the guards have something against it. You can't start writing here." My diary was gone. So I began to reconstruct the whole thing, thinking, what do I still have in my head? I wrote it all down again and sent it in letters to my mother in Germany. My parents came to Germany in the 1960s, and I still know the old language. So I started writing in Serbo-Croat. But now the problem was that after 2 or 3 letters, I didn't want to worry my mother with these stories about what was happening here. I thought, you can't do that. The poor woman will read that. Luckily, I speak Spanish and started writing in Spanish. The guards couldn't translate it. My mother couldn't translate it. I counted 168 letters. Then the moment came when the king of Thailand died. They watched him for years. He was very ill. He was a very popular king, King number 9. And it was always believed that when he died, there would be a big amnesty. We would all go home. At least half of our sentences would be released. He died, and there was an amnesty. But the amnesty was only a fifth of the sentence, so to speak. Your sentence was reduced by a fifth if you had a certain class, that is, conduct. Fortunately for me, that was the highest level. Excellent. So I was included in this 1/5.
This was an amnesty that applied generally to all prisoners?
For all prisoners, exactly. In the drug cases, it was 1/5. In other cases, it was even up to half. So all the others were actually up to half. Only the drugs, which are treated very strictly, only 1/5. Back then, it wasn't enough for me to leave. They said there would be another amnesty at the coronation of the new king. But the new king did not yet know whether he wanted to be king. It took him 2 years to decide. Then there was an amnesty. At first, they said it's not sure if it will be for us foreigners. It's only for the Thais. Everything was uncertain. It was a very turbulent 2 years of waiting for many, because many also had heavy sentences. Then the day came and it was going to be another 5th. But that 5th was enough for me. By then, I had served 8 years and 1 month. This 5th was supposed to bring me home. Then came the day when I was convinced I was going to leave. A list arrived in our building, and on that list was my name, that I was going home.
That means you had to wait for 2 years after this first amnesty until you actually found your name on the list.
Exactly, yes, until it came to this coronation, and, as I said, it was very difficult. Every day there was new news. The coronation will happen next month, or the month after. It was very difficult to wait those 2 years.
How did you experience it then, the prospect of being allowed to leave, of being free?
It had actually become a home for me. Prison was my home. I also never trusted 100% that I would leave, because there were examples of others who left and were brought back in on the same day. That there was a mistake or that there was another charge from the police. They were allowed to serve the first one and then they were brought back the same day or the next day. There were many examples of that, so you always had a bit of a bad feeling. I just wanted to go and hoped this would happen. But I have to say that because I found this place inside myself, my condition was not like the others for a long time. Instead, I always trusted that I would go home. Or when I started to work on myself meditatively or mentally, my story changed. What had previously been uncertain, been fearful, started to turn round really quickly. All of a sudden, I knew I was going home, and I knew I would survive. I also knew once I left what I was going to do. I already knew in my cell everything that was happening to me right then. I could see that. And all the things that would come over the next few years, I'd already seen that too.
Had you already made the decision to write a book at that time?
Absolutely. I had a book planned. I had my first seminars and retreats already written down in the cell, exactly how they would look. That's also exactly what I'm doing today. I already have 2 or 3 trainings behind me, the yoga teacher training and yoga therapeutic, and I also did the fitness trainer. Of course, it's all become a bit more rounded, but I did write in the cell and already planned my future there. That was born out of this place of consciousness. It changed my perceptions. I could learn to love my inner voice. And that's something really fantastic when what your inner voice tells you changes the way you look, but also what you see. You really notice that what you saw before had a different impression on you than it does today. Today, you look and there is an understanding. This understanding is a universal understanding. It isn't something where you say, you have to experience or you have to have dealt with it. No. You have to have known this place to have a general understanding for life. And I had that. You can also call it this primordial response, perhaps. A response to everything. but one that is oriented in such a way that it ensures that we have satisfaction with the moments in life. You get there. Something lives there and it says to you, hey, it's all good exactly the way it is. It's just fine. Then it starts to make sense to you. Suddenly you realize, sure, maybe an appointment has been cancelled, and then one moment you think, oh, what a pity and how stupid. And the next moment, no, exactly right, because something much better is coming. It had to be changed because it's much better in terms of time. So then I think, great, I'm so happy. Trust that everything will work out. Yes, you're happy. You say, I'm happy about that. You've done it yourself. No one comes from the outside and tells you that. But that is what is inside you and lives and has the power to explain it to you.
You said that you had already experienced drugs before your imprisonment. Are these experiences in any way comparable to these special states of consciousness, of closeness to life that you then found?
It is not comparable to the state of drugs. In a drug intoxication, whether that's cocaine or whether you smoke weed or take ecstasy, it doesn't matter. It's a state that brings no understanding that you know what is here. You know, and you're intoxicated and you enjoy it. But there is no knowledge. In this state that consciousness brings with it, there is a highly intelligent form of knowledge that tells you something in a language that you understand, but it doesn't have words. It just says, hey, it's just right. That's where you are. That's your source. And that will have an effect in your life from time to time. That's the great thing about it. What we find here, it doesn't matter whether it's health, whether it's love life, whether it's success, you can really watch how it makes something out of it. How everything changes. In a drug intoxication or in a drug state, you can notice how things go downhill. You can observe that, even though it wasn't the case with me, by the fact that I always earned a lot of money and believed that my cocaine use, for example, would take me further up the ladder. I always believed I was on the ladder going up. I didn't know that it was actually already the way down. But people, drug addicts, who didn't have that capital, they already know that they're not doing well. They are good judges of that. It's like a smoker who knows that it's not good for him. That's why it has to be completely differentiated. Here, it is something very special. So, in this intoxication that I had on this day, or on many days I must say, I did have an unbelievable feeling of happiness. That it was so special on this one day is another thing now. But on many days, I had such a feeling of happiness inside me. No doctor can get you that. No pill can get you that. No drug can get you that. It's not possible. That is something that you can perhaps call sanctuary. That is the essence, where you can say, can I now somehow deal with the word God? Or with the word sanctuary? What does it mean to be holy? And before, it was just a word, a story. Either you believe it or you don't. Now, all of a sudden, it's a place, something that lives. It makes you think. You think to yourself, wait, there is something. It's more than belief, than mind. It has an effect on my life. Then you can call it what you like, but it is there.
You mentioned God and the Word of God. What significance did Christian orientation have for you even before prison?
I learned to pray from my mother as a small child before I went to prison. It was always the same prayer, a very short prayer. So I recited it. What the prison did, by also showing up every fortnight as a priest or as a preacher and also preparing myself well, that is, I read the Old Testament once in its entirety, and I read the New Testament countless times. I also have many favorite passages. I always had the feeling that this connection to Jesus Christ became very special, more and more. Because the little that I could read out of him, this little that was partly very primitive, I felt that this was a very small fraction of what was really there. I was able to develop a lot of love from time to time, so that I could say, he was my attachment figure, like some might say in India. We have these gurus or teachers. You like to have someone you look up to. For me, it was absolutely Jesus Christ. Although I also read books later on from other traditions, Christianity is something incredibly special for me. But I've always been able to preach from it that God is a universal God. For me, it's so clear in these scriptures that there must be no separation, that you shouldn't preach this old orthodox thing about how only we can make it to heaven through the Christian faith, and everything else is wrong. That was very interesting for me, why many preachers don't see that. In this church where I preached, there were many very radical Christians from Africa. For them, everything except Jesus Christ was the devil. Before I became a preacher, it was very difficult for them to understand that I might be seen with a Dalai Lama book or with another Indian traditional book. Until I gave my first sermon and prepared very well for it, for weeks, and talked for an hour about people and about God, and that we all belong to Him. I received applause that I never expected, because they looked at me so stony-faced. I didn't know if they were going to mob me or what was waiting for me. And then this applause started, and it was something very special. That's how my path began, that I became more and more absorbed in the New Testament, but also in the Old. One example, meditation is still preached a lot here, believed to be against our culture or against Christianity. Yoga, my God, that would be from India. One should just stay away from it. In fact, the word meditation is found countless times in the Old Testament and also in the New. That aroused my interest. In the same way with my faith, whether Christian or universal, that today I don't follow any religion, rather I follow faith. But religion for me, as it is practiced now and still is unfortunately not an issue.
How was it for you after it was finally clear that you were free again? Were you able to find your feet easily?
When the plane took off, I knew I was going home. At this point, I discovered a second paradise. That was freedom. That is, I'd already brought one with me. There was no reason to worry. On the contrary, people were watching me very closely. I could feel that, whether it was my family or my friends, and they enjoyed spending time with me. It was a very intense state, even the first 2 or 3 months. You can compare it well with the animated film Alice in Wonderland, because for me, everything was a new wonder. Technology changed, cars changed, my neighborhood was so green. I never used to perceive it like that. I hadn't seen a tree for years. All of a sudden, you arrive in the Black Forest and you perceive these impressions, the smells. And many people ask, what was the first thing you really wanted to eat? I didn't care about food at all. It wasn't important to me. I ate very little for years. But even going into the supermarket and seeing the fruit and vegetable section was the first shock for me. My God, what's here? An orange you haven't seen for years, an onion, a tomato. All something very special. And that lasted for a very, very long time. Then, of course, I tried to find a job. For me, you mustn't lie was still a big theme. Always tell the truth. In the first job applications, of course, always tell the same story. My time in prison. Even though I was likable, it was very difficult to find a job. Then they asked me, what else could I do at the job center? And so I did my yoga teacher training. I already had a yoga class in prison in my last year and realized this is not just something for me, it's for everyone. Shortly afterwards, I did the yoga therapy training, and I also became a fitness trainer. Then I did the fitness trainer training. And that's how it slowly developed, that I built up yoga classes and, of course, realized this dream of leading seminars quite quickly. Also, with the help of others who said, "What you're doing works." I then continued to experiment a bit with friends and family. So I developed 10 exercises a day for 10 days, each consolidating 10 seconds. Learning to pause for 10 seconds means really feeling. It starts to bubble, it starts to rise. That's something that people find easier than saying, "Sit down and meditate for half an hour." But rather, can you manage to enjoy 10 seconds? To learn about yourself in these 10 seconds? I consolidate that so that the person gets a feeling of this awakening 10 times a day at least, gets out of this head into a consciousness, into a place where they say, "That's right, and something is happening, you can feel that." I can only say one thing, that this feeling of well-being through mental coaching, meditative lifestyle, has an effect on well-being, and that this then later also has an effect on health and on the rest. Success, love, and family. Of course, there is no other way.
You work successfully as a coach, lead seminars, courses, and pass on a lot of your experience. Are there any special plans for the future beyond that?
Yes, it all started very well, also with my second book. And now the whole thing has also been discovered in the Balkans. These are the old Yugoslavian countries. A documentary has been published, and the whole thing is actually becoming very public. Now I've thought about it. If it's going to go on track, then it should be made really public. We're still short of a few good spiritual films. So that's what I'd like to do. The story should be made into a film. People who don't trust this whole thing yet and say, "I don't trust it, it's all just a bit of hocus pocus for me, what people are doing," I would like to arouse more interest. My target group is the skeptics. I like them best when they come to me. You can see when a woman has brought her husband. He doesn't want to be there at all, and those are the greatest because you touch them and you can feel what it does to them. They also shed a tear sometimes, and then it's something really great. So, I'd like to make the whole thing even bigger. I want to reach the people who say, "I have little confidence and no time, and yet I'm not doing well. I want to find something." I would like to invite people and say, "Give the whole thing a try."
I wish you all the best for all your future endeavours. Thank you very much for your openness and for this fascinating conversation.
Thanks.